speech is violence. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, move. Slightly disagree. Oh, where are you?
I'm going to say, I'll explain.
You can say, you can keep moving. I'll just put the mic down. Okay. You happy there?
Yeah.
You cool there? Is everything cool? You cool there?
I don't know yet. I think so.
Okay. Well, you can move at any time. You're free to move. Okay. So you strongly tell us why.
I think it's really an issue of definitions. I think violence is anything that causes physical harm to a person, a being, or I guess maybe a material object. So I don't think that speech can cause physical harm. It can certainly incite to physical harm. So speech can cause violence, but that doesn't mean it is violence.
So for you, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So for you, speech is violence is a definitional thing, and you define violence like a physical.
Yeah, violence has. I think speech can certainly cause emotional harm, but I don't think that is violence.
Okay. Oh, you're agreeing with him.
So yeah, I'm on this side because I think that like speech is not inherently violent, but I think that there's like critical distinctions that differentiate why I'm on disagree versus strongly disagree. So I think that I think I'm a member of the DPU. I think free speech is very important on college campuses and just generally in society because it allows people of different views to like better understand each other. And I think that we get that through rigorous debate of ideas and by seeing people principally disagree on things. But I do know that there's like scientific research on how obscenities or how offensive speech, such as using like racial slurs against people, can cause stress, and that causes a shortening of our telomeres, which are, I believe, in our chromosomes. I'm not a STEM person, so don't cite me on this, but it does cause this process that leads to adverse health outcomes. And so I know that while that's a cause of obscenity of offensive speech that can happen, but I think if that makes sense. So I'm trying to differentiate between the cause and the inherent quality of speech.
Okay. So you were a little unsure at first. Are you still unsure? It's 100% okay to be unsure.
Yeah, I think I am unsure just because this is a very like heavy definition statement.
Yes.
And my original thought was, okay, speech can't hurt anybody, so I'm just gonna sort of be on this side. But then after considering it more, what if speech incites violence? I think in that situation, we as a society would put some fault on the person who said the words that incited the violence. So given that fault is placed on this person for violence, I think that in this scenario, it's possible that speech could be violence.
Are you buying that? I mean, is that sufficient to persuade you?
Well, I think it's really like a definitional problem. So I think that this is a very general question, and I think I don't know. I think it depends on the situation. So I don't know if we're talking about like free speech on allowing like if this is a question of like speech between two individuals on a street, or if it's a issue of like bringing a speaker to campus and like that effect, like is that speech violence if you disagree with like a speaker's view, or is it violence if someone's saying a racial slur to you? So I think that those are, maybe that's what you're getting at. I would love to hear what you say.
Yeah, I guess what I was sort of getting at is that if somebody says, okay, murder this person now, and here's exactly how you do it, and here's exactly where they live, then would this person be committing an act of violence? And my original inclination would be, and I think what James is trying to say is that no, it's not violence because you're not physically harming this person, but at the same time, our legal system and our society would place fault on this person for the violence that was committed. So I would say, yeah, maybe it's sort of violent.
Did she convince you?
No, and I think I have also responses to both the arguments that have been made.
Please.
I think firstly to your argument, if I shouted in a room, like an empty room, to nobody, kill that man, it would not incite any violence. If I shouted in a crowded room of people, kill that man, it might incite violence. I think that it's this, but in both cases, it's the same speech, it's the same words being said, it's the same action, really. And so I don't think you can really call that action violence if the only thing that can make it cause violence are the conditions around it and the choices of the people who you're like telling the speech to and speaking to, because this person can choose not to kill that man, or they could choose to kill that man. So I don't think that it can really be violence in that case, because in my mind, violence always causes damage. If I punch somebody, it will always hurt them.
Really?
Yeah, we're
No, I was just scrolling with you. Okay, so she said something that like if I got up in your face, I'm not gonna do it, and I started yelling, like whatever I'm gonna yell about you, that would, especially cameras and such, that would cause a physical reaction, even though I'm here and I make sure that there's distance so there's no physicality. And you said that it has to cause some.
Yeah, I think to that point, there are rather conclusive studies that find that looking at people's stories on social media can cause depression in people. I think that, you see somebody's life, it looks happier than yours, and it makes you sad because you see the best parts of their life and you have the entirety of yours in your mind, right? And I don't think that, I think, that can cause stress and depression and ergo telomere de-lengthening or whatever in a person, or it cannot. I think it's really a reaction on the part of the recipient, but you can't choose not to take physical damage from a gunshot.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you that I'm not sure this is relevant to the question. I'm trying to I'm working through these ideas myself, but shouldn't or let me phrase it more neutrally. Should the burden be placed upon people like sticks and stones may break my bones? So if someone says something mean to you, that we teach people how not to have that, right? Because you can't count on other people to not be jerks. You can only count on yourself to respond to it a certain way. So is one of the reasons that we think speech is violent is because we have a culture in which we're so quick to take offense and claim injury.
I mean, that could certainly be the case. I think maybe the reason why I'm here is I'm sort of a historian by trade. So I sort of look at the effects of historical processes, things like discrimination or racist language and how that affects people. So I think maybe I'm just seeing this question in a little bit of a different way. And so I am a little hesitant to go on the strongly disagree because I'm sort of thinking of the effect of words on people, even though it's not like sticks or stones may break your bones. I'm trying to work through sort of like the health effects that can still occur. So I think what you said could be true, but I think that there's also other ways of saying that.
So I'm going to argue against my own point, if that's okay. So I'm just trying to think of I was just in Budapest, and it's very moving. I went to the Jewish Holocaust Memorial, and I heard some I'm not even going to repeat the stories I heard, but I was thinking, like, if you had a system in which it was literally, I know everybody loves to throw around the word systematized, but I mean, like, it was actually a system. Um, then the constant verbal abuse from people, it would, but I don't know why I'm telling you this. I should be telling you this. Then wouldn't the constant verbal abuse that people suffered, it doesn't have to be Jews, it could be literally anybody, couldn't that be, if you stretch the semantic range of violence just a teeny bit, couldn't that be considered to be physical enough so that you would move to disagree?
No, I mean, first of all, I think I object to the idea of stretching the semantics of violence. I mean, that's kind of the point of definitions. I think if you want to use a wider definition, then yeah, but I'm just not operating under the definition. I think under the definition I'm operating under, speech cannot be violence.
Okay, all right, that's fair. So so it's a definitional thing then. Speech cannot be violence by definition.
Well, I think that the funny thing is that I actually agree with a lot of the things that they're both saying, but and like the policy implications that would probably arise from all of our opinions would probably be very similar. Um,
Can I pause you there? So you basically agree with them?
in some ways, but in other ways, I think that the speech that people the speech that people have and speech that people give have a lot more power than they're giving them credit for. And I particularly took issue with this idea that you could somehow block yourself from speech, but you can't block yourself from violence. It's almost like saying, what if I went everywhere wearing a bulletproof vest and then somebody shot me? Well, everybody not wearing a bulletproof vest somehow is at fault for them dying when they're shot. I just feel like, or the example of shouting into an empty room. What if I stab into empty space? It wouldn't hurt anybody because nobody's there. But that's not the point of speech, just like that's not the point of stabbing. The point of speech is to influence people. And if you're influencing people towards violence, then that's sort of violence.
So isn't the point of speech what someone wants it to be?
Exactly. But some speech is meant to incite violence. So I guess it depends on the speech. Honestly, the example of a professor talking in a university, I think that's completely fine because universities are meant to learn and they're meant to sort of.
What if they're talking about something that people consider deeply offensive?
I think that's still okay because it's the place that people are in. They're putting themselves into a situation where they want to learn and where this is a space where people want to share ideas. But the problem with speech is that you can't always control when and where people do it.
Right.
So yeah. So like if I was shouted at while walking in the street after repeatedly telling people to stop, this would be very different than me going to a lecture and hearing somebody say something offensive. Like these are just completely different examples.
Okay. I think do you so you understand their positions?
Yeah.
You understand both of their positions?
Yeah, I do.
But you just disagree. But you understand
Yeah, I
them. You
understand
understand
it.
them.
I
Okay.
just disagree with it.
And you understand that one and that one?
Mhm.
Okay, real quick. Is there anything that would cause you to move off the line?
I don't think so.
And I think your answer is going to be no, because for you, it's strictly definitional.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even necessarily definitional. I think for me, it's, for example, in the example you mentioned for the memorial, it wasn't the speech that caused the harm; it's the speech causing people to do the actions that caused the harm.
Right, but
It's that sort of removal.
Right. And I was thinking in that
That's
question,
removed.
yeah, so I was thinking in that question, like how horrible it would be to live, because I actually heard the stories from people.
Yeah.
Like how horrible it would be to live in that situation where people are like hating on your con, like maybe it's just a nightmare. Eh, But the question is, I was trying to find an argument in my head for why, for a context, because she was talking about context, the historical context, for when it could be so, again, I'm not using the word systemic capriciously. I'm using it very specifically in this case, like institutional laws, not laws we had in the books 50 years ago. That would be so heinous that it could a reasonable person consider that an act of violence?
Yeah, I would just simply respond that people say those same kinds of words today, just they don't cause violence. People, you can go on weird dark web chat rooms and find people saying stuff just as vitriolic as the stuff Hitler said, but nobody obeys them. And I think the violent part of that is people's reaction to the speech. It's what people do because of the speech, not the speech itself.
Okay, cool. All right, questions. We got 3 questions. Got 1, 2, and
sorry.
everybody runs for the third. Yeah, that's the attitude. Good. All right, 3 questions, and then and please say who the question is for.
I guess maybe for you two, but you can also answer because this is also general definitional. By definition, abuse is violence. So is verbal abuse violence or not?
I would argue that physical abuse is by definition violence. It's physical abuse. I would say that verbal abuse is not by definition violence. No.
So we should really basically just not call verbal abuse because by definition, abuse by itself is an act of harm or violence towards another person.
I mean, I think it can be an act it can be an act that causes harm, but I don't think it's violent. I think if you're defining abuse that way, if you're defining abuse as violent, I wouldn't define abuse as violent. I would define abuse differently. But it's really, I think, that point that becomes an issue of the definition of abuse.
All right.
I'm not really interested in arguing about
All right. Please say who your question's for.
Everybody. It seems to me this question was worded really badly and you didn't get to the real point of this question, which is ought the concept of violence extend only to physical pain, as James claims, or ought it also extend to certain level of mental abuse, as sorry, I'm forgetting your name, the previous person said. But I think that is the question of.
So what's your question to
my
them?
question is, what is your opinion on the actual meat of this, which is, should violence as a concept are we, by using violence as a concept to only apply to physical violence, misconstruing as a society that physical violence is in some way more harmful than verbal violence because we synonymize harm with violence?
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I tried to answer that question, and maybe I didn't. But I think the distinction I was trying to make is I do agree in some ways. I'm going to distinguish this further. I do think that speech can cause violence both in the the punching, or no, sorry, violence can both involve sort of like the punching, the physical action, but it can also be caused by like saying racial slurs, offensive speech that hurt. But I also think that like I'm hesitant to say speech in general is violence, because I think there's different venues that offensive speech can come up in. Like there's like very specific things that the Supreme Court has ruled on as what is protected speech, what is free speech. And so I tend to like be a little bit more hesitant to say generally, speech is violence.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So I have a question for Rhea. You were saying that you were using that example of somebody ordering someone else to murder someone. And you were saying that that specific instance of speech could be construed as violence because obviously our legal system would probably say this person is partially guilty. But I think actually our legal system would be a bit more precise maybe than to say this speech is violence. I think our legal system could just say, okay, this speech has perpetuated violence, it has led to violence, but it is not violence. And so I know that this is purely a definitional thing, but I was wondering what would compel you to move a bit further in this direction and say
I should give you the mic.
and just say that that this definition is maybe useful because it's more precise.
Okay, good question.
Yeah, I mean, if we change the definition of violence to be solely something like the final act, like the final contributing act, then I think I would move to neutral as well. But I also sort of buy Jess's argument about racial slurs and the mental abuse that comes from that. So that would sort of keep me from moving too far that way, almost ironically.
But what he said could cause you to move to the neutral.
Yeah, I mean, if we made our definition of violence like tight enough and specific enough, then I would move. I mean, I don't think my opinions would change, but my physical location would. So.
Oh, interesting. All right. Oh, well, last one. Thank you. Great question.
Quick
You're going to have
question
the
for
mic next
James.
time.
So essentially, if somebody says something to me that triggers an automatic, uncontrollable vagal response, which would cause things like physical muscle pain, nausea, vomiting, so uncontrollable physical harm, isn't that speech causing me physical violence? If it triggers an uncontrollable human response.
Yeah, if there's some sort of like magic word that causes like instant death, yeah, then I guess the word would be causing violence, certainly. I don't think the word would be violence itself. The word is not violent. It's a word that causes a violent reaction.
I mean, go ahead. Sorry, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, so if the statement was speech is violent versus speech is violence, would that change where you stand?
The statement speech equals like is violent, that speech equals violent, like that isn't true, but speech can be violent. Maybe I think you can make that argument. Yeah.
I mean, if that's the case, you really should be under professional care.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's actually fairly common if somebody says something like you should go kill yourself, and it causes you to have an uncontrollable panic attack response. That's a fairly common
The
experience
issue I
in
have with that is
America.
that if you said that to say like a random person or to another person or in a like empty room, it wouldn't cause a reaction. I think if it's really if the impact of speech always depends on the person you're saying it to and sort of their own reaction to it, the impact of physical violence is pretty much independent of the reaction of the person.
All right, we're going to give her the last word and have a quick summary.
Well, actually, I wanted to throw the question back onto you because I actually raised this question because
is this your question?
that you are like I raised this claim because this is something that you have talked about in articles and has also been mentioned by other professors. So if you want to answer it, what's your definition of violence in speech?
Kicking you guys off. Go ahead. Do to me what I just did to everybody else.
So I'll count 5, 4. Hey. I mean, I know you're not from Dartmouth, but I'm expecting some minimum standard here. Come on, you made it up. 4, 5, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's an interesting choice. Why are you standing here?
Well, a couple of things. I agree with the fellow who was standing on this line.
Yeah, blue jacket.
James. I try not to use people's names because when the video goes out, it's probably. But anyway, James. I agree with James. I think first it's a definitional thing, and second of all, I think it is been weaponized to be political because I constantly hear all speech is violence, silence is violence, everything is violence, doing nothing is violence, and I think it is a kind of fast in play way to disingenuinely use language.
But I mean, there is a point to be made that you could say there are certain things that have similar effects as violence, and maybe if they are so physiologically similar, we could actually construe them as being similar. We can put them in the same category.
Yeah, and Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff have written about that in The Atlantic. It's a wonderful piece, and they further address that in The Coddling of the American Mind. Their arguments are far better than mine. So we got two issues here. One is the physiological response, and the other is how it's used practically. And so I just want to address the second one quickly. So if the idea is that speech is violence, so you could like construct a syllogism. Speech is violence. We have to stop violence. Therefore, we have to stop speech. That's something I hear over and over again. Like we have to. There are certain things we just are not allowed to say. So it would be under that rubric. And the second thing is, I'm not I can't. Someone asked you about the magic. It's a magic word and makes people go anaphylactic shock or something. If if that's the case, that's just an unreasonable expectation that we would have to silence ourselves because there are some members in the society who experience some kind of bizarre reaction to the word of a magic word that makes them raises their blood pressure.
So let's work with an explicit example. A lot of you we were just talking about the Holocaust. A lot of you may be aware that Germany has outlawed certain speech about the Holocaust and certain speech like Holocaust denial, for example. And this is not something that is in any way scientific mainstream. It's something that many people, at least in Europe, believe there is really no good reason to say.
Right.
And let's just suppose that there was research. I don't know if there might be, saying that hearing this speech for a certain group of people has the exact same violence, has the exact same effect as actual physiological violence.
Yeah.
Would that, if that research existed, would that compel you to go just a little bit further here?
No, because so Christopher Hitchens argued very eloquently against this, and one of the reasons I think. So first of all, let me just state the obvious that you have to state every one of these conversations. Of course, the Holocaust happened. Of course, millions of people were murdered by the Nazis. Okay, so that's the given. So the question then becomes, should we allow people's speech to deny that happened? My answer is yes. And I'll give you a simple example of this. So there are many Holocaust deniers like David Irving who have given specific examples of things of why he did not believe Holocaust exists. So, for example, he said that if the Holocaust happened, I think you have to hold a little closer here. No, that you're the boss now. If the Holocaust happened, then why are the locks on Treblinka, which was a concentration camp, why do the doors not close? Now, my friend Michael Shermer from the Skeptic Society actually flew down to Treblinka. And he did. I mean, he wrote about it in the Skeptic magazine. The Skeptic magazine, you can read those claims. If we don't allow people to make those claims, nobody will rebut them. They won't go away. They're going to fester. They're going to build. They're going to gain traction and audience. So banning that speech is simply not going to do what people think it's going to do, which is so now we know. So now if someone says, well, why are there no doors? Why are there no the locks on Treblinka? Why don't they work? Well, now you can read Shermer's article. I won't give away the show, but you can read it.
But does that happen in Europe?
In what?
Does that happen in Europe, where such speech is actually outlawed? I mean, it sounds like you're coming up with a lot of theories here, but I don't see a bunch of people in. I mean, maybe I just don't know it well enough, but I don't see a bunch of people in mainstream European political newspapers claiming these things.
Well, that's because it's illegal.
True, but then it worked, right?
No, because you don't know what the sentiment underlying it. If you have a society that's not free and open, there's no way to collect the data. So when you ask the people if they believe something, if it's illegal, you're never really you're never really going to know what people believe, because you don't have a society in which people speak openly and honestly. It's actually, you know what it's like? It's like the contemporary university system. We've created a culture of pretending where everybody's lying about stuff.
Well, okay, well, but Europe isn't Soviet Russia. You can do opinion polls, and it's not illegal to say these things in opinion polls, for example, and opinion polls do not show that people believe that the Holocaust didn't happen.
Right. So I guess maybe now is, what would it take me to move? I'm going to help you a little bit. What would it take me to move to disagree? Is that it?
Yeah.
Can I ask
Yeah,
myself that?
of course.
Okay.
You're not going to get the mic back, but you can ask it.
What would it take me to move to disagree? The best argument I heard here that would cause me to move would be, there would have to be a cultural context, an overwhelming cultural context, which we do not have, in which there was an actual system in place that legally legally discriminated against people, and there was an overt sentiment such that, people were called, it doesn't have to be race, but height or hair color or some kind of a slur to people that caused a kind of trauma in those people that affected their flourishing profoundly, and that doing so would reinforce the culture. Thomas Sowell talks about that a little bit, but that would be that's what it would take to move me to disagree.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for that discussion. I think I'm way above my pay grade here, so I'm gonna give. Oh, audience questions. Oh, of course, Jordan, come on.
All right. That'll go first.
So let's is this on? Okay, let's make the devil's take the devil's argument here. People can spew out disinformation, 1,000 articles a day, and a lot of people argue this. And to debunk them, even Michael Shermer, right? It required him to fly over all the way to Treblinka. So is it perhaps, and I don't believe this necessarily, but is it perhaps not better to sort of stigmatize some of these issues societally to keep society healthy, rather than having to spend a lot of society's resources debunking articles that are unfounded, when those debunkings require a lot of mental effort?
One, no, and the reason is because the arguments are still there. But far more importantly, the only reason you'll know what to stigmatize is through free speech. You could be stigmatizing the wrong thing, and the only way you can figure that out is through dialectic and disputation.
My question to you is much the same to the question of the other three people here who were debating this topic. The core of this question, because again, it's phrased, it should be can be, because speech, no one argues in every case when someone speaks, it is inherently violent. But to say can speech be violent would really be asking, is the term violence just about physical action, or does it also do we use violence to mean physical harm or just harm? And I think the argument that you were arguing against, kind of in saying that you hear this argument all the time, that speech is violence and therefore we have to stop. Really what they're saying is certain kinds of speech can be categorically harmful, like Holocaust denial.
Ask him what his
and
question
that
is.
question, that certain, can be categorically incorrect, and that is what, and because that speech is harmful, it is violent, because that's what we mean by
What's
violent.
the question?
So the question is, what is the definition of violence that you provide the right definition, and why is it?
I tend to take the same position that James took, but I would be completely open to revise the definition, but that would be a different question though. That's how I took the question. If somebody else offered a definition that, I tried to trying to think of a non-sneaky way to say this. I tried to like convince him that we can stretch the term, and he was like, "No, I'm not stretching the term." Um, I would have to have a really good argument to stretch the term, because the word violence to me means a very specific thing, and so, even to the extent of oh, and you can talk about those nuances, like is an MMA fight violence? I mean, I'm not closed to talking about those terms, but in the way it is defined, I agree with James. I don't see there'd have to be an utterly extraordinary historical circumstance in which could exist, but I don't think exists, that would cause me to move.
Okay, last question from my side. You're saying that's your definition of violence, and you're saying that's your definition of violence, and he's saying that's his. Do you think it's legitimate for him to have that definition, or do you think there's something wrong with it?
No, I think anybody can have any definition of, and you could call it a pastrami sandwich. The key thing there is that we have to be open to have a conversation about even rudimentary things, which I don't see happening in the society today. And the way to adjudicate those questions is to sit down and say, okay, so let's talk about this. And maybe maybe we change the phrasing of the question. Maybe we make something different. Maybe we say, okay, it's not violence, but it's something else. Violence. What are those letters that you write in physics? Like sub 2 or something. Maybe it's another term that we create. But the most important thing is, in order for that to be operative in the first place, we have to have a precondition of speech and open inquiry and discourse. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate coming down. Hopefully it was fun. You learned something and you can use it. You can do it in your classes. You can do it in your student groups. And I hope that folks enjoyed that and took something from it. Thank you.